Financial planning and security can sometimes be seen as a moving target. The rules change constantly, and you need guidance to stay ahead of the market moves. This is the Lebenthal Report with Michael Hartzman and Dominick Tavella. We'll break down the news, trends, and overall direction of the markets, telling you what may be coming next, investment opportunities, and what to avoid. Now, here are your hosts, Dominick Tavella and Michael Hartzman.
All right. Well, I'm Michael Hartzman. Today is Tuesday, December 7th, 2021, and we are back after a few weeks off. Welcome back, Dominick. How are you?
Terrific. Back from my vacation and rested and looking forward to restarting the life schedule, work schedule, podcast, everything else that goes with it. So happy to be back, Mike.
Happy to have you back. I was not on vacation for a few weeks, but I did become a grandfather for the second time last Tuesday, which is why we didn't do last Tuesday's show. So that happened.
Congratulations again, Mike. That's a terrific reason. I remember getting the text from you, and that was the happiest news I'd gotten all day, all week. So grateful that we have the luxury to go, you know what, we'll do it next week. No worries.
Exactly. Thank God for Voice America for being flexible. So, getting down to business, Dominick, the market, as you probably noticed, has been a little volatile in the last couple of weeks. But here's the thing that amazes me. And as to quote you, you cannot make this up. When we did the show last, it was Tuesday, November 9th, and the S&P closed at 46.86. Since then, we've had inflation worries. We had weak job numbers. We had not great economic numbers overall. And by the way, we've had a third strain of COVID, which spooked the market. And Dom, where did the S&P close an hour and 4 minutes ago?
40 what, Mike?
46.86. Exactly where it was 3 weeks ago, Dom.
And we're going to get into some of the specifics of what, why, and how. But the reality is that, and I'm sure you got the calls, Mike, we got the calls, that if you reacted, if you allowed emotions to take over, and you did the unthinkable, which is to go, you know what, I can't live through what happened March of last year, and I can't live with that kind of volatility, get me out. You literally liquidated all or part of your portfolio at a 5-10% discount from where we are today. And we can preach it all day long, and we talk to our clients and we hold their hands, and our job is to get them through these difficult times. But emotion is so hard to overcome. And this was a classic one where you literally would have got hurt. Financially, we would have got hurt.
Yeah, and like you said, you can't blame someone. I mean, it literally, the news broke for me. It was Friday morning, so it was of the day after Thanksgiving. So, people maybe even had their mind off of the market, or just relaxing, or not thinking about anything other than their family. And then the market is only open till 1 o'clock on the day after Thanksgiving, and I think the market was down like 900 points.
Obscene number.
Right.
But Mike, and again, we don't have a crystal ball. We always joke about not having a crystal ball, but all you got to do is watch these podcasts, and we were warning clients that expect some unusual volatility, expect that these times historically, you shouldn't be shocked if it snows in a winter. And in this case, volatility, we were prepared for it. We've discussed this many times. We expected it. We were prepared. We had excess cash sitting on the sidelines. Fortuitously, we were able to put some of it to work. But boy, that caught a lot of people off guard. Really caught a lot of people off guard.
It did. And look, a little inside baseball for us. If we know that traders are on vacation, and like I said, people are away, and there is just an avalanche of sellers and not many buyers, it really doesn't take much, Dom, for the market to go down 900 points in a short period of time. And we've seen that movie before as well.
Yeah, market conditions were not great. And then we had Chairman Powell talk about how they probably were going to accelerate their ultimate interest rate hikes next year and tapering this year. And then we had the bad news on the COVID, the new variant that at least day one did not look like this was going to be a happy ending in any capacity. We still don't know, but the initial commentary was not positive. And yeah, it put a big scare into the markets. It put a big scare into investors.
And, you mentioned Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve, and there was a headline. There was a headline this week, it had to be yesterday, where my reaction was, really? Where he said maybe we should not use the word transitory anymore in talking about inflation. Tom, you and I have been talking about this literally for 7 months, right? We've had Dr. Siegel on our show from Wharton talking about it months ago.
Look, Dr. Siegel on this very show is the first time I heard it, and he's been on CNBC and he's been on Fox Business and been on Yahoo Finance. But I think the first time he said it was right here on this podcast, 5% a year inflation for the next 3 years. It took us back, right? My reaction was like, oh my God, what is he talking about? But transitory was not in the vocabulary. And I'm going to be grateful to hear that the Fed's going to stop using that word, because who are they kidding? This is much more of a longer term issue problem, and we're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, that was like the worst kept secret on Wall Street. But listen, we could talk about the market all night, but we do have to switch gears and we do have to take a quick break. Tonight, our guest, Dominick, is another friend of the show. He's a president of TRG Fiduciary Services, better known to us as a division of Touchstone Retirement Services, which is a great partner for us. Our guest tonight is Jeff Atwell, and he's going to give us a review and a roundup of some of the changes that are happening in the retirement plan world. So we will be right back with Jeff Atwell right after this break.
Are you paying federal taxes on your cash? I work hard for my money that I keep in cash. And for the life of me, I can't imagine why anyone would want to pay federal taxes on their cash. That's why I keep my cash in the Lebenthal Ultra Short Tax-Free Income Fund, symbol LETAX, LETAX.
Rates on cash are already so low, why pay federal taxes on the interest your cash earns? Remember, it's not what you earn, it's what you keep. The Lebenthal Ultra Short Tax-Free Income Fund, LETAX, may help you earn more on the cash you've worked hard for and keep more after-tax dollars in your pocket. Find out more about the fund by speaking with a Lebenthal Global Advisors private wealth advisor or its sponsor at dcmadvisors.com.
For your hard-earned cash, why pay the tax when there's the tax?
Lebenthal Ultra Short Tax-Free Income Fund. It's not what you make, it's what you keep. Before investing, you should carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. This and other information is in the prospectus, a copy of which may be obtained by calling 800-441-7031. Please read the prospectus carefully before you invest. Investing involves risk, including loss of principal. There is no guarantee that this or any investing strategy will be successful. An investor should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the fund carefully before investing. The fund is distributed by Ultimus Fund Distributors, LLC, member FINRA. The fund may invest in municipal securities, the interest on which may be subject to federal alternative minimum tax. After the fund buys a security, the IRS may determine that a bond issued as tax-exempt should in fact be taxable. There is no affiliation between DCM Advisors, LLC and Ultimus Fund Distributors, LLC. DCM Advisors and Ultimus Fund Distributors are not affiliated with Lebenthal Financial Services, Inc. or Lebenthal Global Advisors, LLC.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with Dominick Tavella, and our special guest this evening, Jeff Atwell, who's the president of TRG Fiduciary Services. How are you this evening, Jeff?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this evening.
Hey, Jeff, how are you? It's been a long time.
Hi, Dominick. Good to see you.
We are happy to have you. Your firm, Touchstone, or I guess the parent company of your firm, Touchstone, is a great partner of ours. We have a lot of retirement plans that you guys help us manage and record keep and facilitate. So we appreciate that. And let's just start the conversation off at 50,000 feet in the air, Jeff. I know that Congress has passed some retirement plan changes heading into 2022. Could you touch on a few of those that you think are important to our clients?
Yes, they have. And this is one reason why that I started to focus on the retirement plan space almost 40 years ago, is because Congress always changed the rules. And as a result of that, it always created opportunities in what I call my job security. And so, going into 2022, the contribution limits were recently raised primarily due to inflationary adjustments that allow participants and companies to contribute a lot more into their retirement accounts. For example, the salary deferral limit next year is going to be $20,500, which is the highest it's ever been since 401ks were introduced into the tax code in the late 70s and early 80s. And so what's so neat about that, Michael and Dominic, is the fact that an individual can elect how much of that $20,500 is pre-tax and how much of it is Roth after tax. Because in a 401k plan, there's no adjusted gross income limitations like there is in a Roth IRA. So for your participants that have a real desire and the ability to save, they can really do, with your assistance, of course, do some really neat planning as far as their salary deferrals are concerned, depending on what their individual tax status is. But then on top of that, the employer can make additional matching and employer contributions so that the overall maximum that any one individual can have allocated to their account next year is going to be $61,000. And then if they're over age 50, they can have another $6,500 allocated to their account for a total of $67,500, which is phenomenal. It's going to be a great tax planning strategy for business owners that want to utilize a retirement plan as an income tax reduction for their business, and for those owners and key employees as well. With a properly designed retirement plan, we can really do some neat allocations for those owners and key employees of the companies.
Jeff, one of the things I hear all the time, especially new clients, wow, this is way too complicated, way too expensive, and I'm just a small business. This is not a game that I want to play or should play. Talk to us about what is it like trying to set up a new plan for a small company, and is it really that complicated, that expensive?
It really isn't. In fact, from a cost standpoint, you could take my 1983 fee schedule that I used whenever I started my third-party administration firm, and you could compare that to our administration and compliance fee schedule that we use today, and there's going to be very little difference. And that's 30 years of more complicated rules and regulations and inflation, and the fees that employers are paying today for administration and compliance are relatively the same as they were 30 years ago. Plus, on top of that, if you look at the record-keeping platforms, because of technology and the compression of fees, especially since 2012, the cost of plans has substantially reduced over the last few years, especially for your smaller clients, for your smaller plans. I can remember 15 years ago, a small startup plan or a plan with less than $1 million, and you can probably remember this, Dominic, would pay anywhere from 1.5% to 2% or more in fees just for record keeping services. And today, that same size plan with the platforms that we have today are going to be much less than that. Plus the fact that they're going to be able to have some of the lowest cost investments available for their participants, which just a few years ago were only available for the mega plans or the big plans, such as ETFs and CITs and zero revenue sharing funds. I mean, can you believe it today that you can have a mutual fund in a plan and only pay 2 or 3 basis points, and the plan doesn't have to have a whole lot of money in it to be able to take advantage of that.
Jeff, could we get back to the number you said a few minutes ago? I just want to clarify it for our audience. A participant could put away $22,000 before the catch up, but that $66,000 number you mentioned, that's assuming that the business has a profit sharing plan on top of the 401k plan, or the business is willing to have skin in the game. But typically, the average employee participant cannot put away that amount of money on their own unless they are the business owner directly, correct?
Right. So you have three basic sources of contributions that can flow into the plan. The first one being the salary deferral that the employee elects to contribute, which is $20,500 next year, plus an additional $6,500 in catch-up contributions if you're over age 50. The second source of contribution will be that employer matching contribution, and that can be a discretionary formula, or it can be a safe harbor formula, depending on what the goals and objectives of the employer is from that standpoint. But of course, because it is a matching contribution, only employees who actually make a deferral into the plan will receive that match. Okay. And it can be any type of formula outside. If you're not using a safe harbor formula, it can be any formula that employer wants to utilize to reach their goals and objectives. Like we have one plan, for example, that has a matching formula that increases based on tenure and the amount of deferral that an employee is making to the plan. So the longer an employee stays at the company and the more they contribute, the higher that matching contribution will be that they'll receive from the employer. And then the third source of contribution is what we commonly refer to as the profit sharing source. A long time ago, you used to have current year profits or retained earnings, but not any longer. And so this is the tax planning strategy for the company and the owners of the company to reduce their income tax liability. And that's where that shortfall, that difference can be made up between what the employee receives as a matching contribution and what they contribute as deferral to get to that $61,000 maximum or that $67,500. So that's the additional contribution that the company would make. The difference is that it has to be made to every eligible employee that satisfied the plan's eligibility requirements, whether they actually make a salary deferral or not. And that's the difference between the matching contribution and the profit sharing contribution.
Right, right. And Jeff, one other follow-up question to that. Dominick and I have many, many clients who are policemen and firemen.
Mm-hmm.
And they could put money away in their 457 plan or their 403B plan, and they could match it out, like you said. But many of them, may have a second job at a Home Depot, or they may be, accountants or whatever they may do in their spare time. And if they fall into that category and have a unique job away from their primary job, like for instance, if they worked at Home Depot, they could put money away in the Home Depot 401k plan as well, correct?
Yes, they can. Now, especially if they're in a 457 plan. So the contributions that are made to the 457 plan do not reduce the amount that they can contribute to that Home Depot 401k plan, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But if they have a 403B or a 401k plan that they're participating in at their primary employer, those salary deferral amounts will be reduced based on what they contribute there. However, what they can do is, let's say they have a part-time business that they run on the side, and a lot of first responders do that, home repair businesses and other types of businesses. So those are true entities that can sponsor their own retirement plan. And even though they may be maximizing their 403B contribution or their 401k contribution at their primary place of employment, they can set up another plan and contribute if they make enough money, like Schedule C earnings,
Mm-hmm.
or they pay themselves enough W-2 wages from their LLC, for example. They could actually make a company contribution up to the $61,000 in their side business and take full advantage of that, because that side business and the contribution of that plan is not reduced by whatever the employer contributes at their primary place of employment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the key I want to get out of this is that no matter what company you're working for, assuming that company offers you a 401k plan, we get to this maximum limit now of $20,500 and another $6,500 if you're over 50 years old. So these are the rules, the general rules for every company in the country, not just a plan that we might set up or you might set up, right, Jeff?
Yes, that's correct. That's exactly right. And again, as I mentioned, that employee, if the plan allows for it, and most plans do, there's a few that don't, but most plans allow for Roth contributions as well. And so the neat thing about a Roth 401k is there's no adjusted gross income limit like there is in a Roth IRA. So it doesn't matter how much your adjusted gross income is, either as an individual or as a couple married filing jointly, you can maximize your contributions in that 401k plan with your Roth contributions if you have the ability to do that, and it fits your overall tax planning strategy.
So Jeff, I'm glad you brought that up because that's kind of new on the horizon. It's been around for a couple of years, but not that long, where an employee can make a contribution pre-tax in a regular 401k contribution form, or an after-tax contribution in a Roth 401k, correct?
That's correct, right.
And why would one do one or the other?
Well, a lot of people, especially your younger participants who have a lot of time for accumulation, they're pretty much under the impression that they're in the lowest tax brackets that we're going to have during their earning career. And as a result of that, they're willing to pay their taxes today so that once they've been saving in the Roth account within the 401k long enough, which is 5 years, 5 calendar years, or until after age 59 and a half, when they pull their money tax on those earnings later on, and as opposed to the pre-tax savings, where when you pull your money out of your 401k, that's all pre-tax, you're going to pay current income tax on that. Of course, that's where you and Michael come in, Dominick, is helping them plan for that distribution, right, and manage that tax liability when they get to that point. But we found a real uptick in Roth contributions the last couple of years, especially among younger participants who are willing to pay their taxes today, and that therefore not having to pay them potentially at a higher income tax bracket later on when they start withdrawing those assets.
Jeff, one question that Dominick and I frequently get, especially in January after Christmas and people go into a little bit of debt, is borrowing against their 401k. We think it's kind of simple. We live and breathe it every day. But could you go into a little bit about some of the details and some of the pluses and minuses about borrowing against your 401k?
Sure. And most plans, about 89% of the 401k plans in the United States allow for participants to borrow from their 401k account. There's regulatory requirements that state that an employee can only borrow 50% of their vested account balance. Most loan programs, and it can vary from one plan to the next, but most of them have a minimum loan of $1,000. The interest rate that the participant is going to pay on that loan is generally prime plus 1%. So whatever the prime lending rate is at the time plus 1%, that's what their loan interest rate will be that they pay to themselves. So the neat thing about plans today, when you borrow the money from yourself, and it's a tax-free distribution as long as you make your payments. So it's a phenomenal way to use your retirement assets if you really need to, because it's a tax-free use of those funds as long as you make your payments. And most companies require that your payments be made through payroll deduction. So as long as you're an employee of the company, you're not going to have any fear of going into default. Now, the negative to this, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the negative to participant loans is if you do happen to terminate employment and you have an outstanding loan balance, if you do not pay that outstanding loan balance back to the plan within a certain period of time, and it's a lot longer period of time than it used to be, then the amount of that outstanding loan balance at the time of your termination is going to become taxable income to you in the year that occurs. So, Michael, what's happened to that money that individual has borrowed? They've already spent it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now they're going to have a tax liability. And if it's a very large loan, like $50,000 is the maximum amount that they can borrow. Let's say they still owe $40,000 on, that's $40,000 of taxable income in that taxable year, and they don't have any money to pay the income taxes.
And if they're under 59 and a half, Jeff, I'm sure you'll remind them, there's an additional 10% penalty for early withdrawal.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So it can be quite harsh if
right.
you don't use it correctly.
You're exactly right. It's a great tool if people understand the negative side of it, and also understand that if they do not pay that loan back, then they're going to have some potentially adverse tax consequences.
In every now and again, an employee does get lucky. They join a new employer where they are immediately eligible to be in the 401k plan, and the new employer accepts loans as well. But that really is like catching lightning in a bottle for all those dominoes to fall into place.
Right.
So you're right. If someone is taking a loan, they should hope that in their own mind that they have some longevity with that company.
Most definitely, yes. And that they intend on staying at least 5 years until they have that loan paid back, because for most general purpose loans, that's the maximum amortization period that they can have. Now, if you use the loan for a principal residence, you can have a longer amortization period, such as a 10 or 15-year period of time. But generally, most loans are for a maximum of 5 years or 60 months.
And Jeff, I just want to remind people, the plan has to allow for loans, and most plans do, but we also come across it once in a while where they don't. And so if the plan itself unique to that company doesn't allow for loan privileges, then we really don't have a choice.
You're exactly right. And we get those questions all the time, Dominic, because, you know, like one person may have worked for a company that allowed for loans, and they left and went to work for another company, and that plan doesn't allow for loans, and they don't understand that there's not consistent rules and regulations across every single retirement plan in the country.
Jeff, we are bumping up against a break. We spent the first segment talking about corporate retirement plans. And when we come back, if you'll stay with us, I'd love to talk about a subject that ties our clients up in knots, and that's the required minimum distributions.
Okay.
So why don't we spend the second segment talking about not corporate plans, but personal IRA accounts, and what happens and how a client's impacted when they get to the distribution phase of their retirement assets. So we will be right back right after this break with Jeff Atwell.
Financial planning and security can sometimes be seen as a moving target. The rules change constantly, and you need guidance to stay ahead of the market moves. This is the Lebenthal Report with Michael Hartzman and Dominick Tavella. We'll break down the news, trends, and overall direction of the markets. Now, back to the Lebenthal Report.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with Dominick Tavella and our special guest this evening, Jeff Atwell, the president of TRG Fiduciary Services. And Jeff, I know I promised we were going to tackle a difficult subject, but Dom wants to first ask you about a frustrating subject. So I'll kick it over to Dom, and then we'll talk about RMDs a little bit.
So Jeff, you've been in the industry a long time, as well as I have and Michael has, and it seems like this rumor will not go away. And I literally got an email yesterday morning from a client, from an individual claiming that the government was going to impound their 401k or their IRA, that the government had a master plan somehow to take people's retirement accounts away. And we know that government does do changes to these plans almost on an annual basis, but you know, you're pretty high up in the atmosphere there in terms of involved with government regulatory issues like this. Tell us the real story. Are people going to lose their retirement accounts to the government? Is the government really planning behind the scenes to take over and take people's retirement accounts?
Dominic, I'm on the Government Affairs Committee of the National Advisors Association, NAPA, and there's absolutely no discussion going on in Congress right now about doing anything of that nature. In fact, everything that is being discussed in committee, and it's bipartisan, which is really kind of neat to see everybody coming together on some issues. And that is really enhancing the private retirement plan structure that we have today. Now, there's a Secure Act 2.0 that's being discussed in various committees in the Senate and the House right now that's going to even enhance our current regulatory provisions that we have and really enhance more plan design features and the ability for participants to save. So right now, there's nothing anywhere close to that occurring within the Congress that we have now going on. We have a great lobbying organization for our private retirement system. Brian Graff, who's the head of our organization, has been with us for over 25 years, and he just does a great job in making sure that these remember the contribution limits that we mentioned earlier. One of the things that occurred in 1994, and you may remember this, all these limits were cut in half and substantially reduced, trying to obtain tax revenue for the government. So a couple of months ago, we were meeting, and we have monthly meetings. So I asked Brian if anything like that was being considered in any of the bills that are being debated in Congress right now. And these contribution limits that we've discussed earlier today are totally off the table, which is great news as far as I'm concerned. So to answer your question, that's where they would start, is really hammering on the contribution limits, making it where business owners don't find any value in sponsoring a retirement plan for their employees. So you take that benefit away from those business owners, being able to contribute dollars to the plan for their benefit, then they're not going to want to pay the cost of having the plan or governing the plan. So that's it would be a good indication if you want to kind of look at something that might be an indicator towards something like that happening, is really reducing the contribution limits to take away the attractiveness of a private sector retirement plan.
Jeff, you really could argue, and then I'll stop talking about this, but this has really been actually one of the real success stories in terms of what government and regulations have provided. If you look at the amount of dollars in IRA accounts, 401k accounts, 403bs, really Americans are saving for their own retirement. This actually in the end takes the burden off of Social Security and government programs. People can take care of themselves. This has been a true success story.
Yes, it has. And it's going to be even better with automatic enrollment. I think at some point in time in the next couple of years, every business owner of a certain size, like 5 or 10 employees or more, is going to have some type of retirement plan for their employees. And more than likely, it's probably going to require automatic enrollment, because that's really a feature that Congress likes, is automatically enrolling. And you talk to participants all the time. A lot of people want to save money. They just don't want to take the time to fill out the paperwork or go online and make the decisions to save. So automatic enrollment's been around since 2006, and it's really starting to take on a lot of momentum. In a lot of states, there's like 12 states who have introduced mandatory retirement programs for their employers of certain sizes. And the government is actually looking at that. And I think there'll be legislation probably passed next year that will require every business in the country that has 5 or more employees and has been in business for 2 years or longer is going to have some type of retirement plan for their employees. Now that will create
big news right there, Jeff. That's big news.
It is, yes. So, and they're going to use the private sector to bring. Now, if somebody doesn't have a retirement plan, then they're going to use the government's retirement plan that they make available to those small employers. But what it amounts to is they're going to encourage the private sector service providers like us to go to those employers and show them how to design a plan, not only to satisfy the potential regulatory requirements that we're going to have to satisfy, but also have a plan that's much more beneficial than what the government retirement plan will offer, such as your services that you offer to your plans. The government retirement plan will not offer professional advisory services to those participants like y'all offer to your participants. So they won't have plan design consulting like we offer to our plan sponsors, helping them understand how to maximize these benefits. So I think it's going to be a great benefit. They anticipate that there will be an additional 650,000 retirement plans implemented if this law passes. It's going to be phenomenal.
Well, we'll definitely keep us posted on that. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So let's get out of the accumulation phase and let's talk about the distribution phase of a client's life. And one question I think Dominick and I must get 2 or 3 times a week is how the required minimum distribution rules work There's so many misconceptions about it. Some people think they need to start taking money at 59.5. Some people think they have to take 10% out. Some people think they have to spend it all. I mean, I've heard every iteration of misinformation as you could imagine. And then on top of that, in 2019, the government passed the Secure Act, I guess 1.0 at this point, where they pushed back the age for RMDs to age 72. So if you can, just give us another 50,000 feet in the air view, Jeff, of what required minimum distributions are trying to accomplish and how it affects our clients.
Well, that's a great question, Michael. And to add complexity to the whole issue, the CARES Act last year, allowed for participants to forego taking any RMDs in 2020 because of COVID.
Oh, by the way,
Exactly.
Let's throw a monkey wrench into it all after we just passed the rule.
That's right. So, and it happened in the middle of the year after some people had already taken their RMD to even make it even more complicated. So yes, and the thing is that you've got RMD rules that IRA accounts have to adhere to. You've got RMD rules that 403B accounts have to adhere to. And then you've got RMD rules that qualified plans sponsored by employers have to deal with. And they're all different. So for the most part, so let's start with the qualified plan. So if you're not a 5% or more owner of a company or the spouse of a 5% or more owner of a company, you do not have to take an RMD regardless of how old you are if you're still working. And more people are still working past age 72 or 70 and a half.
Jeff, just to be clear, if you're still working at the company where the 401k is at.
That's correct.
Correct?
Right. That's correct.
Okay.
But Jeff, and again, this is stuff we see all the time where one little factoid changes the outcome. But if you've had 6 jobs and you have 5 old 401ks that you haven't looked at in a decade, those do have required minimum distributions, correct?
Yes, each one of them individually do. You don't, like in an IRA, you get your choice of which IRA you take your RMD out of to satisfy your requirement, right? When you have multiple 401k accounts, you don't have that choice. Each 401k account has to make an RMD distribution to you based on your account balance on the last day of that plan on 12/31. So you may, if you've got 5 different 401k accounts, you might receive 5 different RMD distributions.
This is for Mike. Mike, I mean, how many times have we seen this, right? Where a new client comes in and they'll have literally 2, 3 401ks from old employers that they haven't bothered to look at for a decade or 2. And now we're dealing with this specific issue where they may have not done an RMD required minimum distribution at all. How many times have you seen that, Mike?
Literally every day. And Jeff, let's talk about what the penalty is. It's kind of punitive if they do not take their RMD. And Dom's right. We see it every day.
It's 50% of the amount of the RMD that should have been taken from the plan.
50% is taxed, correct?
Right. 50% penalty.
Right.
Is the tax.
Right.
Is
That's
the penalty tax.
Right. Right.
You pay the taxes plus a 50% excise tax. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yes. It's horrible, and it's very confusing. And then if you have a Roth account, even though you're still working, you still have to take an RMD from a Roth 401k account, even though you're still working and you're not a 5% or more shareholder.
A Roth 401k account, but not a regular Roth account.
That's exactly right, Michael. You got it. That's why I wanted to bring that up, is because you've got the Roth IRA rules and you've got the Roth 401k rules.
So, Jeff, I don't have a problem admitting here live that I did not know that one. I assumed that if you were still working and you had a Roth 401k, you were exempt from that distribution, required minimum distribution.
That's a unique feature of the Roth 401k type of deferral and source of money. That's very unique. And yes, it is confusing because you can have your pre-tax accounts, and if you're not a 5% or more owner of the company and you're still working, you don't have to take an RMD from those pre-tax accounts, but you do from that Roth account. So it can be very confusing.
And then, so a client reaches age 72, they call me up or Dom up, or they call their bank up and they say, okay, I need to take my required minimum distribution. Now, Jeff, what is that number based on? Is that based on the day they make the phone call? Is it, well, is it, what's the date they base that on, and where do we get that number from of where the distribution, what the distribution is?
The date is 12/31, what the account balance is on December the 31st of the prior
year.
Right.
So the RMDs that people are taking now are based on the 12/31/20 account balance.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're married and they have a spouse beneficiary, then they can use a joint mortality table. And usually the custodian or the record keeper, like in a 401k, does those calculations for the participant. Okay, the participant generally in a 401k environment, the participant generally is not required to do those calculations. The record keeper or the third-party administrator that's doing the compliance work on that 401k plan will provide the individual participant with what that minimum required distribution amount should be.
And in the beginning, it's about 3.6%, and it creeps up every year as the client gets older, correct?
Closer to the mortality table, yes. Mortality, yep. Exactly.
But Jeff, and I swear I'm not trying to be funny when I say this, but they do this calculation for you. The institution does, and they put that number in an envelope and they mail it to your house with 43 pages of legalese. And they expect, and the IRS expects, that you're going to open the envelope, read through all those pages of gobbledygook, and come up with that number, and then actually ensure that that distribution happens so that you don't get penalized.
Right, that's correct, right. And that's what creates yours and Michael's opportunity, right? Is to help guide those individuals through that difficult documentation, and working with their CPA as well.
Yeah.
We can, especially if it's a large RMD required.
It is a maze. Let me ask you this real quick, just to follow up. You mentioned you could use an actuarial table with your spouse, but does that really only pay off if the spouse is 10 years younger than yourself?
Yes, that's usually where we see the big advantage, right?
Right.
It's where there's a big difference in the ages, yes.
Right, because I think they may have even done away with that rule if the spouse is less than 10 years younger than you.
Yes, well, and you can't go back, but as far as you can go back is 10 years.
Right.
That's the deal. Used to, you could, if you had a younger wife that was 20 years younger than you, then that really made a big difference. But they changed that for the
Jeff,
furthest.
if I had a younger wife 20 years younger than me, my current wife would make it very difficult for me to go home today. Jeff, we're running out of time. So I know this is a pet peeve of yours, and I'd love to squeeze in an answer if I can. Target dated funds. Every 401k has them in there. Everybody thinks they're supposed to be for one purpose. The day you retire. Give me a quick opinion on the subject.
Most off-the-shelf target date funds, the glide path is designed to create returns rather than reduce volatility, because that's the way most people have chosen, as far as plan sponsors, chosen their target date funds, if they hadn't hired professionals like you and Michael, is based on performance and not glide path evaluation. What's going to happen if we get into a sustained volatile market? A lot of traditional off-the-shelf target date funds are not going to perform very well. And as a result of that, a lot of participants are going to be very disappointed. To give you a quick example, last March, when we had that brief, March of 2020, we had the big correction. I serve as the named fiduciary on a lot of retirement plans. And as a result of that, it's very important for me to know what's going on with the investment advisors that we work with. So I did an analysis of all the 2025 and 2030 target date funds, all the major ones in the Morningstar database. Some of those 2025 target date funds at the end of March had lost 16.5% in their 2025 funds. So if we'd had a sustained market correction, Dominick, those individuals that were that close to retirement, 5 years away from retirement, would have been very disappointed because they don't have the time on their side to recapture those losses. And it's all as a result of the construction of the glide path.
You know, that
Thank you.
sounds like a subject we need to dive deeper into, Jeff, but unfortunately, we are out of time.
Hard to believe.
So
Sure
I
is.
appreciate you joining us this evening. And we wish you happy and healthy. And again, we appreciate you coming on, and we'll definitely see you down the road. We definitely want to talk more about target dated funds.
That sounds great. Well, I really
Thank you,
enjoyed.
Jeff, and happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you too as well. Have a great evening.
Thank you. We'll be right back. When you're thinking about where to park your cash, for over 30 years in the business, I've been a fan of funds like the Lebenthal Ultra Short Tax-Free Income Fund. It's managed for cash and designed so the interest income you receive is free from federal taxes. And who doesn't love paying less taxes?
Mike, generating interest that's free from federal taxes is appealing, but I've been in this business for a long time, and people love the potential for more income on their hard-earned cash.
Sorry, Dom, but the beauty of the funds is paying less taxes on cash.
No, my friend, it's the potential for more income.
Less taxes.
More income.
Less taxes.
More income.
Less
For your
taxes.
cash,
More income.
ask your advisor
Less
about the
taxes.
Lebenthal
More
Ultra
income.
Short Tax-Free Income
Telling you,
Fund,
less taxes.
or find out more at dcmadvisors.com.
Well, Dom, one thing I know we agree on, it's not what you earn.
It's what you keep.
Lebenthal Ultra Short Tax-Free Income Fund, symbol LETAX. LETAX. Before investing, you should carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. This and other information is in the prospectus, a copy of which may be obtained by calling 800-441-7031. Please read the prospectus carefully before you invest. Investing involves risk, including loss of principal. There is no guarantee that this or any investing strategy will be successful. An investor should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the fund carefully before investing. The fund is distributed by Ultimus Fund Distributors, LLC, member FINRA. The fund may invest in municipal securities, the interest on which may be subject to federal alternative minimum tax. After the fund buys a security, the IRS may determine that a bond issued as tax-exempt should in fact be taxable. There is no affiliation between DCM Advisors, LLC and Ultimus Fund Distributors, LLC. DCM Advisors and Ultimus Fund Distributors are not affiliated with Lebenthal Financial Services, Inc. or Lebenthal Global Advisors, LLC.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with Dominick Tavella. Dom, Jeff was a great guest, and you brought up a really important subject kind of at the last minute there, and I wish we had a little bit more time to discuss it. But target dated funds, I would just guess, and I have no data in front of me, that the bulk of 401k assets these days go into target dated funds. And I think you or Jeff said, they're not all apples and they're not all oranges, and some of them are really very different from each other.
Yeah, and I'll speak for myself. I'm not here to paint them as something terrible or bad. It's just people understanding what it is that they're actually buying. So a target dated fund based on a specific date has a allocation of how much of your money's in the stock market versus how much of your money's in the bond market. That allocation stays pretty static. You're not going to see any dramatic changes or go to cash if the markets go down or rebalance actively. They're pretty static vehicles. So they will experience the volatility that the market is going through, both good and bad. That catches a lot of people by surprise.
But here's the catch. There are two types of target dated funds, right? Jeff, you mentioned the glide path. There are target dated funds that assume you're going to retire in 2025 and take the money with you. Those are called two funds, 2025. And then there are other target dated funds that are called through funds that assume you're going to retire in 2025, but keep the money there and be retired, God willing, for 30 years. And therefore, if you have a little risk in the year 2020, it's okay because your time horizon is not 5 years, your time horizon is 35 years. So you also have to know whether you own a 2 fund or a through fund. And again, I know it's complicated gobbledygook, but it's important.
But, and Mike, I completely agree with you on that subject. I'm just going to take it a little bit further because the average participant says, well, somebody is watching my money and somebody is making an active investment decision on an ongoing basis. And yes, these accounts do rotate risk year by year by year. But when I mean it's incremental, I mean it's incremental. And as Jeff alluded to, you had what the 2025 fund, which is generally considered a pretty conservative portfolio, was down 16+%. A 2045 fund may have been down 30%.
Right.
And people are like, oh, wait, this is a retirement account. How could I have lost 30% of my money if
Right.
somebody was managing it?
Right. And look, it's okay if you're in a 2 fund or a through fund, or you would expect the volatility if you're told about it. And I think the problem with a lot of these plans, the way they're set up, is a participant's given an 800 number and a web link, and they're really left on their own dom. And I think that's the problem with designing how to invest your money.
And that's really, Mike, you hit the nail on the head as you usually do. You're 100% correct. It's okay if that's what you think is appropriate for you. It's okay if that's how you want your money allocated. But if your perception is this is an ultra safe vehicle and somebody's looking out for it, and that's how you choose to manage your money, that's a big mistake. It's a huge mistake.
Exactly. So, Dom, as always, we say it every week, the hour flew by. I guess because we haven't seen each other in a month, it flew by even quicker this evening. But we had a lot to talk about between the market and retirement planning. But unfortunately, my friend, we are out of time.
Once again, out of time. We did leave a lot out tonight. It just weren't enough minutes in the hour here. But we'll pick up this ball next week. We have a lot of stuff to talk about, getting close to year end. So I'm already looking forward to next week's show, Mike.
Me too. Stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you down the road. Good night.
Congrats again, Mike, on that beautiful grandchild of yours.
Thank you. Layla B is in the house. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lebenthal Report.